interview format today, but how about a warm welcome for Proctor? And just to be able to get you in and out and back to work, we do this while, they're going to be serving food, so there's a little commotion that goes on, and we just have to kind of live with that, and that's why I'm going to get a microphone in his hand so you can hear him above dishes and forks and glasses. Yeah.
No, I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, definitely.
Good. All right.
He did give me the cheat sheet, all the questions and asks, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I think I told him last time we met I was feeling very convicted about reading Share What God Has Done a lot over and over. And I said, so anytime somebody asks me to speak, I'm going to say yes. This is the first time since that's happened. So appreciate that. But anyway, appreciate y'all being here as well.
Yeah. And I'm going to say yes to whoever asks me to speak is such a dangerous thing to say. Because I book people all the time. So.
Yeah.
So let's just start. Let's let guys get to know Wise Rock. First of all, just tell us a little bit about who Wise Rock is, your product, your service, how the business has gone since you launched it, and when you launch it, etc. Just bring us into that a little bit.
Yeah. And I'll just kind of tell this part to an outside observer who can't see behind the scenes, kind of what's happened. Starting my career in the Wise Rock. So I'm a petroleum engineer at A&M. I graduated 2010 and then got a job as a petroleum engineer at Hess. And really enjoyed that. I had done a little bit of coding in high school, and over time there, just really found that I really loved kind of the software side of things, starting to sell, and then Spotfire and SQL Server, and doing more and more analytics, and kind of found that I was able to convince them to let me do that full time there. So I ended up building tools for the engineers around me in offshore West Africa, Gulf of Mexico primarily, on the production engineering side. And through I'll share a story, but kind of some series of God events, ended up leaving there and did a 3-month software development boot camp down in Pararank with full stack web development. Moved into product management from there at P2 Energy Solutions, which is one of the largest oil and gas software companies. Had a chance to kind of learn kind of the business of software and be a product manager there, which I didn't know at the time, but that's basically what you need to know to start a software company. And so then got into analytics consulting after that. Just took a couple long-term contracts, again, working with engineers and building out analytics solutions, a lot of times with Spotfire and those kind of tools. And in the middle of the second one, kind of started having the idea a lot of the ideas came all the way back from Hess, but kind of really saw something come together of a small product we could build. Ended up hiring a developer, told the operator I was working with that I was going to build it, and if they wanted to license it, they could. And they almost did, announced bankruptcy at the last minute. It took another 9 months before we got our first 2 customers, but yeah, so we ended up getting our first 2 customers in oil and gas. Basically, the software we build is primarily focused for production engineers, so they're the ones that are responsible for when an operator has wells producing. Once they've been drilled and they start producing, the production engineers are the ones that actually make sure that the wells are flowing every day and fix any short-term issues. And so what our software does is we come in and we basically connect to the most important systems of record that those engineers need to do their job. And we bring them all, there's 4 main systems. We bring them all into one lightning fast web interface and allow them to see all the data they need to do their job in one place. So, which is the first time they've had that. Even at super majors, it's a difficult integration problem to solve. We just happen to be using technology that's been built by Silicon Valley that's come out in just the last few years that allow us to do it very rapidly. And it's harder for these huge companies to adapt to the technological changes that are available now. And so we bring that in, and then we allow them to collaborate around this data and manage tasks and really do exception-based surveillance. So they can see for the first time, I'm losing 12% of my production today, and it's due to these 50 root causes, and I can look back over the prior year, et cetera, and start to improve that. But we've really built the platform in a way to be generalizable to any type of surveillance. And so it would work, we believe, just as well in the future for a windmill or for a solar panel. You can imagine, especially industrial applications, that basically just need time series data and a target, and then when you deviate from that target, that you can annotate why, and then start to solve it with root cause analysis. And so we're really trying to take away the most mundane and repetitive parts of the petroleum engineer's job and let them focus on higher level analytics work, like the stuff that I was always trying to do as a consultant, and how to solve this problem to make that more possible. And so it was never the plan to do that. Honestly, it feels more like I'm just an observer, and we kind of feel like that, where it was like, oh, cool, people will pay this for analytics consulting, awesome, I guess I'll do that. And then, oh, this looks like a cool little product to solve, and it kept growing to where we realized it had bigger application. And so we, just on the business side, what's happened with WiseRock, we got our first 2 customers in late 2019. Took a while, they were super happy by March of 2020. We kind of went out and, like, for the first time publicly, like, told people what we were doing at a Shark Tank event up in Denver in front of 40 operators, and we were picked as the top one there. And that was great. And then about 2 weeks later, prices went negative. And so the timing didn't seem great at the time. Fortunately, I had just gotten into Praxis Labs, which is a Christian Business Accelerator, which I definitely recommend y'all check out if you want to. They're out of New York. I think if you, unfortunately, Google Praxis Labs, there's actually another result above it. So keep looking. But that was transformative. But we ended up realizing we needed to raise money. We didn't think we were going to before. I'll talk about that in a moment. Survived. We're able to raise money, praise God, through 3 Praxis angel investors. And then we got our first publicly traded customer in late 2020. 2021 was more about learning how to scale sales process. We got up to 9 operators and roughly 4x star revenue in 2021. And then last year we realized that actually we had better product market fit with the largest oil and gas companies in the world. And so we ended up closing deals with some really big operators, and with a free trial model, had a 9 out of 10 success rate so far. And so now we're a little over $2 million in annual recurring revenue, and about 10%, a little over 10% of U.S. onshore oil production is actually being managed by our customers in WiseRock. Our largest customer is 6% by themselves, and so it's pretty concentrated once you get to the really big guys. And it's been really fun to see. We don't have direct competitors. The operators have been a little frustrated about not being able to fill out the official RFP form correctly because they can't find competitors to what we're doing. And we've got now some deals in the works that look like it could triple our revenue again in the next 12 months. And so there's 11 of us now. Many of the guys are here today, and we basically hope to keep growing soon. And so that's the story to what people would see or what they hear about, when we do a sales pitch.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so that's incredible. And one of the things I would like to hear about, Brock, along with the sort of glowing reality of what's going on at WiseRock, is I love to hear stories about defining moments or pathway in a man's life. That is kind of places you pass through, or things that you experience, kind of defining moments that sort of land you in being who you are and doing what you do. You give us a little bit of the resume ramp up of where you've been, but take us into a little backstory, Brock Meyer, with it. Tell us who you are.
Sure. So I, grew up, doing well in school, like most people in here, I'm sure. And so I kind of got my identity from, like, my mom even said that sometimes when kids would pick on me, I wasn't always the most popular kid. Like, it's okay, like, you're smart and you don't have to work around people like that in the future. And so, like, it's kind of true, but, like, that didn't realize, and she's awesome, but didn't realize that was something that I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And the thing is, after college, I got that job and had the money, and ended up in Houston in an apartment by myself for the first time. And it wasn't fulfilling. It was like, okay, cool, now what? And I ended up getting very depressed, which hadn't happened before. And so that was a really hard time, very humbling. Also, I ended up, my mom said, you should really go out and meet more people. I grew up in a Christian home, grew up Catholic, and I went to Eustis First Baptist because there's tons of young people there, and ended up joining a Bible study for the first time. And it actually was like my one light in the day, where other people were talking about the bad things happening to them. I didn't share mine, but it was kind of cool to hear other people share theirs. And so it was actually on the book Experiencing God as well. And so that book ended up having a huge impact on my life. And if you guys haven't read Experiencing God, the framework is really, to my engineering mind, pretty awesome. It's kind of a framework for building faith. It's the way that I think about it. Basically, it's very biblically based on many stories in the Bible of, God is always at work around us. Like, he's got a plan, and it's going forward. And he actually wants us involved, and he actually primarily only works through humans, right, that are following him. And if we're willing to listen, he actually will communicate with us. I've never heard a voice in my head, but like they talk about in the book, like through the Bible, through prayer, through circumstances, and through other Christians or some of the main ones there. And if we're willing to slow down enough to listen, then he'll get our attention, and we'll at least be able to tell clearly enough, pretty sure I'm supposed to do this. But you kind of know one of the ways that it's God is that it's pretty risky, and it's the type of thing that other people would say, like, do not do that. That's not a good idea. But if you, and he'll give you enough faith to where you can make that choice. And if you make it, then the shocking thing is you get to experience God personally. And the way that I think about it is it's a statistically very unlikely event that could ever occur without God being involved. And so I read that, and it was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And I started trying to do that a little bit. You get distracted and everything, and started to see some of that working. And I was also like talking to my friend at the time about faith, and I really struggled with doubt, where especially hell, the concept of hell, for whatever reason, like I still can't wrap my head around my human mind around why hell has to exist the way it does and everything. And I was like, well, the problem with faith is like that's the only thing that gets you to heaven. And I had read a book by a really smart guy, and he said, it confirmed that you can't increase your own faith. Like if I said, hey Tom, if you believe there's an invisible pink elephant sitting between us, I'll give you $10 million. Well, he can try to tell himself he believes it. He can pretend he believes it. He can try to forget he doesn't believe it. But he won't actually believe it unless maybe he bumps up against it, right? Unless there's evidence outside of him. So that was very frustrating to me. And so I told my friend about this and really was just praying a ton about God to fix this doubt problem. It took like 5 years or something, but often through this framework of just trying to discern God's will and do it. I get to say that like it's true. Like it actually, like you really can see evidence for yourself. And it's shocking once you really understand that like God actually exists, the God of the Bible. Like heaven and hell exists, like that's infinity compared to our, blip on this earth. Our friends and family, like are gonna end up in one destination or the other. And this God loves us so much, and he's actually willing to involve us in this world war going on right now that we can't even see. And he loves us so much that even after we're saved, that we're able to actually participate in ways we were made to, right? It's not that like the Christian journey is to go make sure you join the right church and then you like follow the right rules. It's actually an adventure, right? Is what I've discovered. And so I also got married, and we have 4 kids as well during that time, which has been a huge journey. But my wife and I both got to the point where we could just see God work so clearly. Oftentimes by not obeying, then things fail in a shocking way. And so that's also the flip side of the coin to experience God kind of the hard way. And so, the thing that it's kind of inconvenient about it is that here we are in early 2020. We've got 85K in revenue. There's 3 of us at Wise Rock, but in my mind as an entrepreneur, this is a $1 billion company already. And like, and you can see what appears to be this clear path naively back then to that. But the problem is I'm not excited about that by itself. I'm excited about God now because he's removed the faith problem. And so the question became like, okay, if we're going to raise money, then you have to maximize revenue. Like, what if that doesn't fit this framework of basically just listen to God and then do what he says? And so we kind of had some kind of things come together that led us to make different decisions with Watch Rock after that.
Oh, that's great. So I love that experiencing God is in the middle of it, and that you said faith is actually an adventure. So you discovered that faith is actually an adventure. Do you have any comparison of what you would perceive of God, faith, prior to that sort of encounter, that journey through experiencing God? Is there a way you can see it in your mindset?
Yeah, the thing that I heard a phrase somebody said, I believed in God like I believed in Panama. Like, it's a country, it exists, but it doesn't really affect my life. And like, once you experience him, it's kind of like Job 42:5, where he says, like, I had heard about you before, but now I've seen it with my own eyes. And like, once that happens, then it's a radical shift. And it's not that it happens overnight. Like, I don't really understand the theology of it, but it's definitely a continuous surrender. And I feel like God brings us to like places where we can then surrender again, and we can see him more clearly. And so I think before it felt like a fact, and now it feels like the most important thing. Basically.
Wow, that's great. I love that description of believe in God, I believe in man. That's excellent. So while they're taking the food out, just kind of a reminder that what we're doing in this summer series, as Greg mentioned at the beginning, is we're calling it Radical. And so, that, in our culture, it means something like extremely different. And so, the thing we're looking at is how people's faith is helping them to live significantly different than the sort of the general flow of culture in some key areas of life. So, as I mentioned earlier, Craig talked about generosity earlier. In August, we'll have Colby Mick will be our speaker in August. Yeah, so you guys know Andy was with jail and all. He's going to talk about radical view towards balance of work-life balance. So, but Brock is here as our example of radical in regard to business, and the radical heart of wine for us is I will let you explain this term if you would, and if you know what that's fun. It's kind of a redemptive business, and there's a genre out there, a little bit out of that's right with that, but I'll go redemptive business. And so, if you just take a second to tell us about your perception of what redemptive business is, and then open the hood wise, all right? Would you just take us down into the real workings of the company's DNA? Right. So again, what's radically different about what?
So I highly suggest Googling Praxis Redemptive Business Playbook. Tim Keller is an organization in Manhattan closely tied with him. Basically, they've chosen the word redemptive to encapsulate what some people might say faith-driven or kingdom-oriented. And the way that they say, like, what redemptive is, it's what Jesus did and continues to do for the world. And they say that our role as business people is really, as Christians, we can think about it as creative restoration through sacrifice. And so it's actually that we get to use all of our God-given creativity to think about how we can restore the things around us within our sphere of influence. And it will require sacrifice. But the cool thing they say is there's actually three types of kind of ways of working. The first is exploitative, which we know that's basically I win, you lose. Like many businesses are like that. The next is ethical, which is win-win, right? So that's good, right? If you're not taking advantage of people, most businesses are probably in that category. But what redemptive is kind of goes to radical or like maybe a logical way, unless you believe in God, that it's actually I sacrifice and we win. And so they believe that like with the problems in the world, somebody's going to have to sacrifice to be able to lift others out. but there's not actually not a loss by the person ultimately making that sacrifice.
Good. So tell us about that part in Wise Rock.
Sure.
Who you guys are.
I mean, it actually starts with the financial generosity side. I heard about Alan Barnhart's story. I don't know if Trey Little talks about him with radical generosity, but he's a guy in the late 80s. He and his wife were going to become missionaries, and his dad had a small civil engineering firm with like 5 people in the garage, and announced he's going to retire. And he said, "We're either going to give it to you, or we're going to sell it to somebody else." And they're like, "Oh man, now we have to like pray," because he was very good at business, but they felt called to mission work. But they prayed and they said, "Man, you know, if you do the math, like if we like succeed with this business, we can maybe support 10 missionaries." But they prayed about money, and he did a 2-year study on money, and he basically decided, hey, instead of asking how much we're going to give away, like what percentage, why don't we just calculate how much we're going to keep? And so they basically chose like a missionary salary and set their salary, I think, at like $85K. And I think it never went over $125K, and they have 6 kids. And God grew that business 25% a year and continues to. And I think it's like a $450 million business now. They move, if you need to move something heavy like a nuclear reactor or something, that they do it basically in the U.S. And he's now they give away half their profits and they reinvest half their profits. And they also gave away all the equity in their company in Barnhart Crane and Raking. And his kids thanked him. They're like, "That would have been really inconvenient if like you had died and we had to figure out what to do with the money." And so that's a pretty awesome thing, but also like shocks you when you hear it. I heard about it through the master's program. You might want to look that up through one of the sessions on financial generosity. And I actually got to go to Generosity, which, you know, Trey worked with them at Barnhart's office. He hosts, I think, like 10 of them every year. And so my wife and I basically came to terms with that, and we're like, actually, we want to do that too. And so we knew we wanted to set a financial finish line. We hadn't done all the math of like how much we need to save and even what the financial finish line will be. But we realized that with Wise Rock, we could use that as a tool for you know, making its purpose more towards what we're excited about, which again is like we just want to be on this adventure with God. And like I personally don't want to spend so much of my life and so much pain and heartache of like trying to start a company if it's not about that. Honestly, if it grew rapidly and it ended up just being about money, I would get bored and quit compared to the other things going on in my life. Well, okay, so how can you go to investors and ask them to invest in that, right? And so so what we realized is let's just tell them what it's about. It's going to be what if there existed a company, a corporate structure that at the charter level said, we're just going to abide and obey and do whatever God says, and we happen to be in cutting edge software, the most powerful industry in the world for the foreseeable future. Like, what would God do? Like, you want to do that with us?
Say that line again. That whole thing. Just say that whole thing again. Bring
Yeah, like what if there was a company at the corporate level that decided we're going to abide and obey and just do whatever God tells us to do as an organization and see what happens, and we happen to be in software, the most powerful industry in the world. And we basically went to talk to investors about that. But we had to kind of prove we weren't crazy and that we meant it. And so my wife and I realized that just my salary's enough, whatever the financial finish line will ultimately be, like it's definitely enough to cover that. So we can just give away the equity ahead of time, which I found out we could do through Barnhart. So we gave away 99.9% equity in Wise Rock to a donor advised fund. So if Wise Rock ever did sell, then my wife and I can give away the money or reinvest it and eventually have to give it away. But we have no plans to sell, and we told investors that. So we basically like said, okay, we did that. Would you also receive your return back to a donor advised fund? But we have no plans to sell, and so we can't do it through equity because that's not going to be worth anything. So it'll be through a revenue share. And so basically, for like the first round was for every $250K they invested, they got 1% of our revenue, up to a 10x return. So Cody Knapp up at RTI in the Woodlands. Met him through Praxis. Awesome, amazing guy. They're very redemptive business at scale. Turns out I found out later Praxis said, I was talking to the founder of Praxis, and I was like, we're trying to figure out how to scale. He's like, do you know Cody Knapp? And I was like, yeah, he's our main investor. He's like, oh, Well, out of our whole portfolio of everyone we know, they're doing at scale like the best job of being redemptive. And so God has just brought people around us to learn from. And so he invested $1 million in WiseRock. His DAP is going to be 10. He got a tax receipt for the million. He can give away, if we're successful in the future, 10 million.
You may know. Explain donor advice fund if people never heard that.
It's basically a checking account that if you give your money to it, you get a tax receipt for that money, and then you can advise them where to send it later. So it's really convenient from a tax perspective. You just like do a monthly deduction to that account, and then you can decide later where you want to send it. It has to be to a 501c3. And through Impact Foundation, it can now actually be invested in private entities for the first time as of like 5 years ago, which we met them, and they're the ones that own our equity, and they're the ones who made what we're doing actually possible.
Yeah. So he dedicatedly goes to support nonprofit organizations or movements.
And you can also invest in like the S&P 500 to grow it until you give it away if you want to. And now you can invest it in businesses and like receive an equity stake that your donor advised fund owns, which you could then sell later, or it can be a debt structure, revenue share, like we're doing. And so I mean, even the Praxis people were like, that's not going to work. You're taking the investable world. You've only got 2 customers down to like maybe like 0.5%. And I used to say, but they all know each other, and that's why it works. But like I realize now, because we're in the middle of a fundraise and it's taking longer, that it was God. I don't know. We just had 6 conversations and raised 1.3 million, and it was like the month before, we would have been missing payroll and everything. And so God, provided the funding from that with 3 amazing investors. We also have a capped compensation structure because, again, the idea is a generosity-based structure. I mean, salaries can get crazy at software companies eventually, and so basically what we also want to do is prevent mission drift. We don't want to ask people, hey, can you sign that you believe this statement of faith that we believe? We think that would be unhealthy. Because who knows if people's ideas change and who's to say like who's in, who's out, right? And so instead, we just make it to where the people that are really setting the culture of a company it's from the top, and just the leadership team, executive leadership team has the vast majority of the influence. And so what we're using generosity not because we believe it's theologically required, but it's really a strategy to prevent mission drift. To where even if WiseRock is growing rapidly and we can go after all these things, that we can know that we're going to be led by a group of people that are driven by these other things. And so basically, as someone makes more salary at WiseRock, a larger percentage of their salary goes to a donor advised fund. So it's 10% for the first 100,000, 20% for the next 100, 30% for the next 100. By the time you're making 500,000, you're keeping 350, and then 150 is going to your DAF, and no one's up to that point yet, but it kind of grades that way. And then after that, 100% goes to your DAF. So we basically have a shared cap compensation structure up to 350, and then we don't have equity, but the equity-like compensation will also go to donor advised funds. And so we actually believe it's great. We want to be able to hire someone from Google making $400K a year as a machine learning engineer. They come to WiseRock and make the same amount, but they're like, what do I care? I was going to be generous with that anyway. And you're telling me I can start a startup, I can start new companies with this and everything too, and you can do all these things. And I can come work at a company where ultimately it's not going to make investors rich, founders rich, early employers rich. It's all going back to redemptive purposes. And so the last kind of thing there is Barnhart gives away the money, right, every year to nonprofits, which is amazing and has crazy impact, way more than the 10 missionaries they thought. I think it's $30 million a year now that they're giving away. And it's managed by employees, not him, which they believe it's actually a lot better, that they individually were pretty bad at giving money away, but when they do it together, they're a little more effective. What the vision for WiseRock is that we believe that there's tons of money going in nonprofits. There's amazing nonprofits with great leaders and great vision, but often when it comes to technology and the processes being built around that technology, there's a lot of gaps. And the problem is that if you're in software, you're attracted by the companies with a ton of money if you're really good. And if you're at a company with a ton of money or you've got VC money, you must go after the highest profit potential things. And so you're not going to go after the nonprofit market because it's too small. And so what we said is, man, the value of Y-Shock is going to be, if it works, that we're going to have hundreds of people, hopefully one day, that are capable of doing what appears to be impossible to most of the world, which is find opportunities that can scale and then actually build the product and the sales and the customer support and the marketing and fundraising processes behind that and scale it. And so rather than, like, my wife worked at a crisis pregnancy healthcare center in Houston and we saw this problem there, rather than just giving $1 million to them and saying, like, hey, go, you can use this to improve your technology, which most investor donors, by the way, won't say. They want to see it, like, go straight to, quote unquote impact. They would probably go purchase Salesforce, right? And then it'll like largely be wasted. And so what we said is, what if that $1 million was instead treated more like a venture studio model where employees at Y-Shock are able to spend their time, a portion of their time, kind of like Google, whatever God's leading them to try to find some little product market fit. A lot of it's going to be with our core platform. It's very generalizable. It's effectively a data warehouse that is built on the modern data stack that allows you to really understand what's going on in your business. What if we could do that for a few crisis pregnancy healthcare centers in Houston, for example, and it starts to get product market fit? Well, then we could scale it to all 400 in the United States. And what about the world, right? And it turns out that they could actually all learn from each other if they had better visibility into their data. Turns out that philanthropists would actually, many of them would love to be more data driven, but they're receiving data in spreadsheets and they feel bad asking them to spend even more time in spreadsheets. And so if Y-Shock could solve that problem, actually helps the CEO of these nonprofits to say, I'm going to focus more on my business fundamentals and the actual things we're trying to do, and I'll let kind of the exhaust of the systems of record we're using, QuickBooks, volunteer check-ins, electronic health records or whatever it is, show how well we're doing, and then we can go, to the David Weekleys of the world who want to see the data and just show them. And if we do well, then they'll pour more money in, and the ones who are struggling, we can help them and like, they can stop spending so much on, like lunches like this where they try to raise money. And not that we're trying to raise money here, but lunches like this. And so that's the kind of vision is if we succeed, there's not gonna be a sale, but we're hopeful that we be fairly unique to the world and that we'll have the revenue and the profits. We're competing with, the Googles and Palantirs of the world and beating them in our space. And that we can hire people that their God-given talents are amazing, right? And many of them are searching for purpose, actually, and they're like, I just don't think I could be a machine learning engineer on a scalable system, and it necessarily matters, so I guess I'll just retire maybe when I'm 45 and then figure it out. They hear about Y-Shock, and they're like, I might quit right now just from this one conversation. And so if we could have a group of people like that are really working together, which is also very difficult to do for us in software, to care about each other and not our own ambitions, if that could exist, and also we would be allowed to focus on low profit initiatives when no other organization that has ever raised $1 equity-based capital is really allowed to do that, that it would be unique, a fairly unique tool that God could use for redemptive purposes in the world.
It's awesome. So, right down that line. So you talked about the big elephant in the room that you don't know is there till you bump into it. And then God went from being like Panama to being like Rio. And so you have this vision and this development of this company. And I know that from talking to you, one of the things that super fires you up is the hand of God stories of the ways that you have experienced in the midst of doing this business. Right. And you want to share some stories from it?
Yeah, there's a really inspiring biography I read, autobiography about George Mueller. He wrote, and he basically, the summary is in the late 1800s, he felt called by God to never ask anybody for money again as a pastor, which made all the other pastors really upset. And he put a box in the front with a slot in it that said, don't give it to me, I don't want to know you're giving it. If anybody gives it, I'll open the box each week and see how much I have to live on. And God eventually led him to start an orphanage with that same method. And it ended up growing to where they were supporting, by the time he died, I think they raised the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars with never an ask And basically what he would do is just publish a newsletter every year, and it would go out to hundreds of newspapers. And he would like document like meticulously like crazy things that God did, often financially, like where there was like, hundreds of orphans and they ran out of bread that day, and everyone was praying for over an hour, including the kids and the workers. And then a bread truck broke down outside, and they came in and had food, and just story after story like that. And what's interesting is when he said like the reason I'm starting this orphanage, he said, yes, I care about the orphans and their well-being. I care even more, yes, about the orphans and their spiritual well-being, that I want them to come to know Jesus and go to heaven. But more than that, I actually am just really have a burden that men today, and this is in the late 1800s, don't really believe in the power of prayer and that it works. And I just feel called to show the world that it does. And it's shocking that like God is willing to do miracles. And so what I found through experience is it's not all the time, but it's often at points of major decisions. And so I wanted to share a story about me leaving Hess, and then a story about Kevin coming to Y-Truck, who he's not here today, to kind of explain what we mean by receiving specific guidance. So when I was at Hess, I read a book, Speaking of Jesus, and it basically says like, hey, just start talking about Jesus, stop talking about like religion. And like it turns out if you start a conversation with someone about Jesus, it doesn't matter who they are, there's power in the name of Jesus. And so I basically just started walking around Hess and going up to people and like, hey, what do you think about Jesus? And it was crazy. No one got offended. I think there was like 40 conversation I had, over a few months. It culminated with a kind of a Toolbox type lunch where I invited everybody to come, and a non-Christian manager paid for a bus at Hess to like send them all. And it was like, all kinds of people went. And so that was pretty cool. Around that time, like things have been going really well, and I was like, man, my career is going to be about transforming Hess's digital transformation. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to be here forever. Within a period of like a couple months, like everything unraveled. My boss went back to Norway. I ended up working for another guy. He and I butted heads because our personalities are probably way too similar. And basically one day he called me because there was a politics thing going on, and it was partially my fault. And he's like, I heard what you did, Brock. Go home. I was like, what? Like, I've been working for you for 6 weeks. I've talked to you like twice. You barely even know me, and you're not going to give me the benefit of the doubt to let me explain my side of the story. No, go home. And I was like, okay. And so I'm like at noon on a Thursday, like, heck, like I was ranked, top 1% at Hess the prior year, and I was like, they can't, he doesn't even know like what I did for the offshore team. He's on the onshore team. And so I'm walking, and I had taken the bus that day, and this guy, I was going to catch an Uber. This guy comes up to me, he puts his hand on me, a homeless guy, and I thought he was asked for money. He said, you look like you're having a bad day, and I didn't think I had a bad look on my face, but he just started praying for me for a few minutes. I remember one thing he said is like, I know that Brock's going to be a great leader one day. And then he stopped praying, and of course he's going to ask for money, right? But he didn't. He just like, thanks, and he walked off and left, that's kind of weird. It's like, okay. And so I got in the Uber, and I'd been talking to some Uber drivers about Jesus, and the Uber driver was playing Christmas music, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll ask him if he's a Christian. It's a good segue. And so I did, and then he's like, how's your day going? So I told him a little bit. He's like, Brock, let me tell you this story. And so he said, I grew up in Africa, and I had an opportunity to go to Europe, and I had this amazing job for 5 years. And all of a sudden, this one lady, she lied about me to my boss and tried to get me fired. My boss found out and told her if she doesn't stop lying about me, that she's gonna get fired. And then she went above his boss to his boss's boss, and he got fired anyway. So he's back to Africa, and he's like calling out to God, why are you doing this to me? And he's like, Brock, it led to a series of events where I'm now about to graduate with my master's degree from a university in the US. I'm gonna be your professor. And he's like, Brock, God might not want you at Hess, and if he doesn't, you don't want to be there. I was like, okay. And so then the next day, I had a lunch set up with a guy named Steve Van Udegum a month prior, because he had spoken at this church event about how sometimes we think we can't share our faith in work settings, and we actually can. And his whole talk was about legal aspects of that. And I had asked to meet with him, and it had been set up a month prior. I went to lunch with him. I almost forgot I remember the hour before, went to lunch, and And he was the most wise person I've ever listened to because I told him what was happening. And everything, he just had scripture memorized. Well, like, we'll flip to this, we'll flip to that. What does this verse say? So what does that mean to you? Like, is this unexpected? And basically by the end, he's like, why are you even worried? And so that all happened. The next day, they basically said, we want you to take off for the rest of Christmas and until January to like cool off. And then, and I was like, okay, thanks. And then I came back and they said, we want you to like really reconsider like what you're gonna do for this new team. And maybe you need to go to the Bakken up in North Dakota because you haven't been there yet. And or you can take severance. We're going to be starting to send out severance soon because of the downturn happening in 2015. And I think they could tell us considering it, and it kind of made them upset. And like they were like, okay, you're taking the severance. And so basically, I was like, okay, but before I go, I want to have a conversation with the head of HR because this is not right. I was very upset. And I said, I'm not going to sue or anything, but they said, you need to stop talking about your faith at work. Like, that's not appropriate. I was like, that's illegal for you to say this to me. And so anyway, I got together with the head of HR, and he was an awesome guy. And he started the conversation by saying, okay, tell me what you think. And I talked for 10 minutes, and he's like, okay. He said, well, I'm a Christian too. I grew up Catholic. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then he said, you mentioned that it's not fair. He's like, is life fair? I was like, no, I guess not, and it's been way more fair to me than most people. I was like, okay, and he's like, well, you also mentioned that like you're worried what other people are gonna think, that it's your fault, but it's actually not, and that like you didn't do anything wrong. He's like, does it matter what anybody thinks? I was like, no, I guess not. And so I basically got up and shook his hand and started walking out, and he's like, oh, by the way, there's no rule that says you can't ask for more severance. I was like, okay. And so he had 3 months, so it's 3 months, and I was like, well, who do I ask? He's like, me. I was like, okay. So I went back to my house and sent him an email. Considering the circumstances, I'd like to request 5 months severance instead of 3. Approved. And I was like, okay. And so I told people that I was leaving because God made it so clear. He did. And I told him that's why I was confident. And my mom again was like, Brock, don't do this, the downturn, all this stuff. And I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I thought I was going to start an analytics consulting company. Turns out I wasn't good enough to start an analytics consulting company. And basically because I'm in oil and gas, that's why I was able to do what I was doing in an oil and gas company. And it turns out I was relying on myself. And that was the second time I got depressed. It hasn't happened again since then to that degree. And God just showed me, like, I control your mind. And I ended up, like, 2 months later, trying to fill out a resume. I couldn't even think straight and was just, like, barely getting up off the couch. And this was after I thought I knew how to follow God, right? And I found out about this 3 months offered on boot camp, which ended a week before my severance. And I didn't have the savings or anything or the guts to, like, not to do it if it hadn't been for the 2 additional months. And so then I got to go through that for 3 months, was still depressed by the end. I remember like sobbing in the car like a week before it ended, like, God, I can't even apply to a job. I don't. Like, what did I do? I'm about to take a third of my prior salary. I was calling the shots, now I'm gonna be a junior dev, like what in the world? And he got me 3 interviews in a row within a week, and each one I got the offer and it was better than the last. And it ended up at P2, which paid the foundation for my whole career, and they offered me a job as a product manager. I didn't even know what a product manager when I started the interview process was. And so that was just like an example of some of the stories that where God just acted clearly. There's a more clear one that happened to Kevin. I'll just explain this real quick. Kevin is a rock star petroleum engineer, like 4.0 from A&M, rocketed to the top of Talos Energy, is like just doing really, really well there as a very young person. And he meets me, and I'm like, hey, like, would you be interested in WiseRock? And he's like, I said customer success. He thought it was going to be customer support, but he's willing to listen because he's been praying for 5 years that God would combine his love of Jesus and data. And he's like, it's a very ridiculous prayer, but I've been praying that. And he's almost like embarrassed to say that. And he's like, WiseRock seems like it's combining Jesus and data. And so he was praying about it, and he'd have to be crazy to like leave that job, take a large pay cut, go to a startup, And so he was praying with his friend, who is Caleb, is his friend. We ended up hiring both of them. And his neighbor called him and said, hey, we have this prayer meeting. Will you come to it? Oh, no, he thought about this prayer meeting on a Monday. And he's like, man, my neighbor's been inviting me to this prayer meeting, but I haven't gone. I think I feel like I should go today. His neighbor texted him and said, hey, will you come? And so he's like, sure, I'll come. And he told his wife, like, do you mind watching the kids? He starts coming. He just typed in the address in his GPS, and he called Caleb on the way and said, hey, let's pray on the way to, and he was getting towards his destination, and he was praying about Wise Rock and the decision, and the words came out of his mouth, God, please show me where you want me to go. And as he said that, he turned into our parking lot that he had been to the prior week for the first time. And he's like, what the? Did I type the wrong address? And he looked, and it wasn't the wrong address. There's actually a prayer gathering that happens in the same complex as us. And he pulled in, and then he realized, like, he literally just stopped the car and was like, wow, God, you just, man, gave me this very clear answer. And then God continued to confirm it through very, unlikely conversations they end up having with other people who knew others at Wise Rock. And so, like, the problem with these stories is they take a long time to tell. There are literally hundreds of these. Now that we're all together at Wise Rock, the cool thing is we get to hear each other's stories. They're what we call, like, small miracles, or I would call it that. Maybe it's not the best name. At least a couple times a month now, where we're like, oh my goodness, like, there's no way that wasn't God. Like, that's, and so that increases all our faith, and it reminds us that God is not inactive, and he's actually the one pulling all the strings, not us, no matter how smart we feel like we are, in business. And so that's probably my favorite thing about Wise Rock is that it appears that God's willing to do it at scale in an organization, just as well as he's willing to do it in individuals' lives.
That is so. Thank you for that, man. So, I feel like maybe you're sitting there listening and you go, man, this starts stirring stuff up in me. So, let's take a few minutes and then we'll let you kind of give it a closing challenge in a second. But yeah, you guys got any questions for Rock? And by the way, this side of the table and one of the back are parts of his team. And so welcome to you guys and here. But yeah, Alex, go away.
Yeah, you've mentioned your mom 3 times in this interview. Tell me about your dad.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That's interesting you just asked that. Really interesting. So, I said God made us all unique. So my dad, and he doesn't mind me saying this publicly, like, has bipolar. But he's on medication, it's all better. But, like, I'm somewhere on that spectrum. Like, and it gives me, it makes me prone to, like, downstates, and it also makes me prone to upstates. It turns out that, like, there's actually proof that, like, the upstates, a lot of creative people have that, and that's where, creative ideas can flow more easily, during those times, and Wise Rock would not exist without those up times. But really the down times are where the real blessing is. I would be a jerk. I mean, look at the entrepreneurs out there, like, that are successful. I mean, they're just not nice people. I would be like that. I wouldn't be saved if I hadn't been humbled 2 times really, really a lot. Like, when you're depressed, you basically can't think of anything other than your sin. And it's even beyond that, like, to despair. But, like, I do go through down phases, like, on a regular basis where, like, what I thought would have been easy last week is now extremely hard for me to do. And that's not useful to business in some ways, and in other ways it is. And the cool thing is, like, we now have a team at Wise Rock, praise God, that's happening, where we can share that load, and people can kind of evaluate the 10 ideas that might come out in one day and say, like, okay, that one actually seems like it might make sense. But, like, each one of us have a personality and even a history, even what some people would say is a mental illness, right? And, like, and yet God can use that for his purposes. And so, that's what, that's, my dad and I have a good relationship now and everything too. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Anybody else?
So go.
Yeah, go, Greg.
So Brian, you talk a lot about Wise Rock being a redemptive business. And, most of the people in this room don't own their own business, don't have the ability to call the shots on their wherever they work for. What's some advice that you can give to some of us who love this idea of being redemptive in their career, but don't own the business, don't own the shots, can't call the shots? What's some advice you give for us as we go about our own individual careers?
So I actually don't think everyone should be an entrepreneur, but I'll say this one joke that Bob Schenck with the Master Program said. He uses the verse where it's talking about slaves, right? And he says, if you obey your masters on this earth as if serving God, but if you can break free, break free. Like, try to just like be an entrepreneur if you can. But in all seriousness, like, actually, I think that really, like, everything does flow down from the leadership team of any organization or the board or whoever it is. And there are redemptive leaders out there that they truly believe their business is for God. There's many of them. Unfortunately, like, many don't think they're allowed to talk about it publicly, so they're hard to find, harder than they need to be defined. But like, look at Praxis, look at C12, at Network Around, and you can move to a company that like is aligned with the way that you want to live. Ultimately, I think if the senior leader's not there, then there's a cap on what you're going to be allowed to do. And why not work for a business that is looking at the world through like a completely upside down lens? Like, we're crazy to the world, like, to believe what we believe. And it will change the way that we work together if we're doing it right. Also, one thing too is just like get together. I think it's really awesome to just think about like, how many people do you know that like have different skills in business? Some have money, some don't. Different stages of life. To be able to get together and start a business, or even just like start a team, and then maybe that can spin off into a business or whatever. Like, I mean, I never took like a crazy risk to start WiseRock. It was just consulting and kind of the next step. It wasn't like, I never thought I was taking one. It ended up being risky. But like, I think that like, with the skills that people have in this room, there's probably not a reason you have to work at a company that you don't feel is aligned with what you believe about the world. I think that's maybe not true, but abide and see if it is, and see what God might provide, another path forward there. So I think that'd be good.
I have somewhat of a different question. So I know that like the Bible talks about how like the strength, or that the gift of the youth is their strength, and just youthfulness, you hear that term thrown out, and that the gift of older people is wisdom. And you're a young guy, right, with a very ambitious and longing to do well. What conversation could you see yourself wanting to have with yourself now in 20 years in regards to somewhat of this ambitious, I would even say some people may call it youthful endeavor, that you look back and say, oh man, we were crazy to do this. And maybe another way to ask you that are there other older guys who are looking at you and maybe calling into question or challenging you to think about maybe a less radical way? I'm just
Right.
how you would answer that.
Well, one thing that's been amazing is like, it was a side effect. Well, I thought it'd be important, but I didn't realize how important of the way we raise money with our first 3 angel investors all buying into this notion. I met with them then monthly for over a year and a half, and then it's gone on a little bit because there's kind of more focused advisors in my life at this point. And I still have friendships with them and call them, but man, whenever the going got tough with them, like, they're just like, dude, like, first of all, like, are you sure you're like, taking care of your family correctly, and we're gonna pray for you. And they're holding me accountable, right? But it's from a completely different perspective than anybody, even a Christian that like gave VC money, right? Like, because like, hey, you need to really just like scale this thing 10x, or like, it's okay, just fail. Like, we just need one or the other, right? And so that has been critical. What I will say is that, and I try to say this as humbly as possible, like, yeah, there's definitely people that are doing amazing things as Christian business and who have made a ton of money. And I do the same thing too. Like, you just start to think like, I probably know like pretty quickly what the answer should be when somebody talks to me. And I've definitely been in rooms with people like that who are awesome. And they're like, I don't think you should do that. and that's not going to work. And like, it's almost like I would kind of like ask why, and they would get frustrated. Like I shouldn't have to explain why. Like, just listen. And so like, I would say it's okay if that happens. Like, don't take that as like, well, this guy is really an amazing Christian every other way. Like, we're all susceptible to like rapid judgments, and we can't like actually rely on the opinion of anyone else. Like, that's one of the hard things about abiding is you just have to like focus on what you feel like God is saying. You know. I hope I answered.
That's great. All right, we'll move back to John Austin, then we'll wrap it up after that. Go ahead.
So I just recently finished the David Green's recent book about the Hobby Lobby feather. He, I think 3 months ago, gave away Hobby Lobby to a trust. And basically endowed it to God. And it's, I think hindsight's 2020, it's like 30, 40 grand kids that it says, you know, it's easier for a trust to be able to manage this money. However he's ate or so. And I think it's easier at the end of your life to rent those kind of course with money. You're not 80 and you've got 4 kids alive. Giving 99.9% of your equity stake in your company, especially in the industry you're in, twofold. How did you feel like the Lord was leading in that way, you and your wife? And then also, I think I know the answer to this question, but do you think you'll regret it?
Yeah. Well, my personal experience, praise God, is it didn't. I have a kind of a non. I don't know if it's a healthy relationship with money, but I just don't pay that much attention to it. And my wife kind of feels the same way, so it didn't feel hard. I actually think it would get harder the later you wait, because once you've like thought about like what can I buy with this, then you're like, well, it would be cool to have that boat or that jet or that extra house. And now you have to like sacrifice it. Like, we just never started thinking about that. And we still get excited about other things. Like, what about like a camper or whatever? Like, and we still make plenty of money to like send our kids to private school. But like, it felt easier for us maybe because we weren't naturally inclined towards that, but like different people are, and maybe that's why God made it easier. Just we both happen to be in that situation. We have probably other idols. Like, mine is more, I just want to build cool stuff. Like, I don't care that much about the money, and I have to worry about sometimes idolizing that. But the other aspect is that I just had a conversation with Jessica actually like last week, and I was like, man, you know, like, we're trying to like raise money, and we were like trying to calculate valuations. Like, man, do you ever think that like this company's like worth at least 20 to 50 million now? Like, we could have like, that could have been ours. Like, what do you think? And she's like, no, I haven't really thought about it that much, but like, I wish that we could finish this conversation about the remodel that we want to do. Like, and that won't require very much, but like, you just have different goals. What I think with our kids, man, if our kids, by the time they're out of school, by the time they're out of our house, they have experienced God do so many miracles that their friends in college can say that God doesn't exist. And they're like, I've seen him, you know, and they're not gonna care about money either, you know. So,
Amen. Say. Yeah. So yeah, we always purposed this starting at times through there, bringing it real mainly right there. But I'm just gonna pray for you, for us, and then Greg can come up close to it. Yeah. Lord, I come to you right now, and I thank you for the incredible things we've heard today, and the truths. Even though Brock's story is a unique story to him and those who are on his team, that you're writing similar but different stories in the lives of every man in this room. Thank you that Brock is fearfully and wonderfully made, that you wove him together in his mother's womb many, many years ago, and you fired him the way you wanted him, with certain emotional, intellectual, physical, social capabilities and limitations, that you design to come to full fruit in great joy. Thank you for the story we heard of that today. But thank you that you promise
that your strength is made perfect in our weakness, and that your grace is sufficient. And not just for Brock, for his team, but for every man in this room. And he said, well, we're weak, then we're strong. And you work in an unusual way. So thank you for that. Thank you for the defining moments that you've given to Brock, and in recognizing that you are not like Panama, but that you are like oxygen. And that he and his team want to abide and obey. And I pray that you give them the insight, wisdom, the grace to do that, not just now, but for the long haul. I pray that the chapters that will be written in the story of Wise Rock and all that are part of that would just abound. And I pray that, Lord, that you use these same stories as a way of stirring a divine sense of imagination in every man in the room about the way that you, the God that we can't experience, would be pleased to work in our lives. And that we would align ourselves to you and see unfolding the next chapters you would write there as well. So we look to you now at these things in Jesus' name, and thank you for loving us and sending your Son to redeem us and inviting us to be part of what you're up to. In Jesus' name.
Another big hand for Brock.